This is Greg Troutwine with Offshore Engineer TV, and we're very pleased to be joined today by Jim McCaul, the Managing Director of International Maritime Associates and World Energy Reports, to discuss IMA and WER's latest 5-year outlook for the floating production market. Jim, as always, a pleasure to see you again.
Well, thank you, Greg. Appreciate being here.
Okay.
So let me give you a little background on what I've done, just so maybe you could understand. I've been involved in this deep water floating production sector now for, well, over 25 years. Some of it has been through International Maritime Associates, where we've had quite a few consulting assignments for companies in the sector, including field operators, contractors, leasing companies, investment houses. And some of it has been through World Energy Reports, which we founded 6 years ago. And WER has been set up to develop and operate a online database. And that database is something that I've helped put together, and it has all of the floating production projects that have ever happened, or hopefully will ever happen. Well, hopefully there'll be more than what is in the database. Anyway, that's the background on me.
Okay, so Jim, as I said at the outset, you've just finalized a 5-year outlook for the sector. Can you give us an overview of the floating production market today as you see it?
Yeah, it's a big market. It really started in the 1970s, so it's only been around for about 45 years. And during that time, there's been approximately 500 floating production systems built, some of which have already been put out of business. But at the moment, there's around 400 in operation. There's another 40 on order, and another 40 that have been on field but are now off field. So it's a fairly big business base. In terms of dollars, though, it's probably bigger because the numbers don't really express the size of the business. These floating production systems can easily run to $1 billion, $2 billion. They get up to $3 or $4 or $5 billion in some cases. So they're real big ticket items, and they've provided a flow of income for companies in the oil and gas supply chain for quite a few years that has typically run between $15 and $25 billion a year in revenue.
When you look at the drivers for the floating production market today, which includes, of course, COVID-19, the impact that it has had and will have, what do you see?
Yeah, well, just to go back a bit, we're looking at about 200 projects that are in the planning stage at this point. About 120 of them are FPSO projects, and the rest are other types of floating production systems. And all of these are projects that have gotten to a pretty advanced stage of development, to the point where, well, people are actually looking at the development solution, and floating production is high up among the possibilities. But none of those projects will go forward if the business situation doesn't warrant it. I mean, it's one thing to have a project in the planning stage. It's another to make an investment decision to spend $1 billion or $2 billion in getting the field in operation. So what's happened over the last, 9 months since the beginning of this COVID situation, the market essentially tanked. It's one of many markets in the world that has tanked, but the deep water market has absolutely gone down the chute. And COVID-19 is the absolute big gorilla in the corner here that people, have to take into account. The field operators have all been cutting expenses. The latest has been ExxonMobil, who up until just recently has basically been one of the positive thinkers and planning to spend a lot of money. They've cut back tremendously. Chevron before that, and actually all of the field operators, all the upstream companies, I don't think without exception, everyone has cut back on their CapEx. So obviously that's put the floating production sector in in limbo at the moment. That it's really the question of when COVID-19 will go away. We're looking at it going well into 2022, perhaps into 2023 before the impact fully dissipates. So during that time, the deep water business, the floating production orders will all be held back. I think by 2024, 25, which is the later years of our 5-year forecast, things should look a lot better. In fact, they could actually be considerably better because the lack of investment in upstream facilities at this point is eventually going to result in a lack of supply. There's going to be a supply-demand imbalance, and prices will go up, and these oil companies, the big ones, will come back into it, and I think the expenditures could really go quite higher back in the later years in this 5-year forecast. But at any rate, COVID-19 is the big driver. But beyond that, there are others. Coming behind COVID-19 is the energy transition, and energy companies are stepping over themselves to get into the renewables business, and renewables basically cuts into fossil fuel, and as fossil fuel demand decreases, so will deep water demand. So this is a long-term impact. So what you have now, when you think about these 200 projects in the pipeline, you have the field operator looking at the immediate situation, which is COVID-19, and there's still great uncertainty about when it will eventually end. And the field operator, the upstream operator, is looking at the long term, next 5, 10, 15 years, of varying estimates of when oil demand will peak. And within that situation is trying to make a decision on spending $2 billion on a project that won't come into operation until about 4 years after he makes that decision. It won't generate any positive cash until about 7 or 8 years. And by that time, if you believe certain people, demand for fossil fuel will have collapsed. So this is the situation that these operators are facing, and it basically works its way back into the floating production business and into floating production orders, and it's causing the hiatus that we now see in the business.
Can you discuss what you see as the pace of production floater orders for the coming 5 years?
Well, we think it's going to be lower than what it's been in the past, but it's still going to be substantial. We're looking at orders of somewhere around 60 production floaters over the next 5 years, give or take. Some of them will be FPSOs, some will be FPUs, some FSRUs, some liquefaction plants, floating liquefaction plants. And they'll generate revenue, our estimate is around $75 billion over the next 5 years. That's $15 billion a year, which is at the low end of what it's been over the last couple of decades. It's been 15 to 25 billion, and what we're saying is probably going to be around 15 billion. But that's the misleading figure. In fact, all those numbers are a bit misleading because the demand will be more in a 3-year period than in a 5-year period. The next 2 years are going to be pretty lean. Certainly 2021 is going to be lean. 2022 will get better. By the time we get into 2023, 24, 25, I think the orders are going to go way up. And I think it's inevitable that this will happen because there is a need for the oil production. And people, including us, think that deep water is going to contribute about 8 to 12% of all of the oil production over the next decade or so.